Can I also please ask you, I have asked a couple of times, but would you mind coming down? Unless you've got real reservations, can I get you to come down? I tell you why. I've got two people who'll be walking up and down here with roving microphones, and the poor souls, you know, by the end of the evening, they'll be £10 lighter if they've got to go up and down. So that will be fantastic. Thank you. Come on, Carrie, come on down. It would be lovely if they were in the middle.
Can everybody move towards the middle, please?
Doesn't matter. It's just getting them to come further down. That's the point, I think.
Electric shocks on the seats.
Okay. I know there are other people who will be joining us slightly later, but that's fine. We will, I think, get underway if that's all right. So, first of all, welcome. My name is Diane Kemp. I'm a professor of broadcast journalism here at Birmingham City University. I'll be chairing the event this evening, and I'd like to welcome you all here on behalf of Birmingham City University and newsinbrum. This is a joint event that's being put on here today. As you can see up here, child poverty in Birmingham, Kerslake debate number 2. It's the second in a series of debates that we've started running. There will be 4 in all. The first one was put on, well, in fact, really just by you, Pauline Geoghegan here from newsinbrum, who I think most people here know. It was such a success. People really felt the need to have public spaces and opportunities to talk about some of these issues that Sir Bob Kerslake identified in his review, the tail end of last year, that we thought it would be a very good idea to run a further series of debates. And to that effect, we've got one here which BCU is hosting. The next one will be on the 20th of April, if I can get you to put that in your diaries. 20th of April, that's going to be on the issue of leadership, which Sir Bob also raised as a particular problem within the city. And University of Birmingham is going to be hosting that one, and there'll be a 4th and final one, which Aston University is going to host. Date to be fixed, but the subject of that is likely to be about buildings, transport and infrastructure. Okay, so we've got some very interesting debates, I think, to come. I started off the last time we had one of these debates by just doing a quick sort of pull together, if you like, about the Kerslake Review. I've got a synopsis up there. Can I just do a quick straw poll? Hands up if you actually read the Kerslake Review and / either all the 67 pages or the 11 recommendations. The 11 recommendations. Right, okay. You are a very unusual audience. As we talked about last time we were together, and we showed a little vox pop that my students had filmed, the majority of ordinary people in the city not even heard of it. When they were told what it was about, they said, oh, that sounds interesting. And indeed, they're right. So many issues were highlighted in that review. Birmingham City Council then also did a rejoinder to that review and a synopsis of their comments as well as Sir Bob Kerslake's recommendations are outside. But one of the points that was raised, which we felt was worthy of having its own discussion and debate, was the issue of child poverty. And child poverty in Birmingham, really very shocking figures when you look at it. So before I get us started and introduce our panel, what I'd like to do is just to show you a short film which one of my international students, who's doing a master's in journalism with us, I said it'd be really nice to have a little short film, a couple of minutes, about the issue of child poverty. And she went out to look at the kind of things that are happening in the city, where in terms of what the community and different voluntary groups are doing to try and alleviate the issue. And bearing in mind that 84,000 children, according to the Child Poverty Action Group, have been identified as living in poverty. So that's the context of this. But I thought we might start with just a couple of minutes of seeing what Sandhya Iyer made of the issue of child poverty in Birmingham.
The phrase "a tale of two cities" is now commonly being used to describe Birmingham. A growing divide between the rich and the poor is attributing to issues like child poverty. A study by the Campaign to End Child Poverty highlights that 47% of children in Ladywood are living in poverty. Rates for Hodge Hill stand at 43% and Hall Green is at 42%. While thousands are starving in the city, the Real Junk Food Project Birmingham runs a weekly community cafe at the All Saints Church in Small Heath. The co-founder of the project, who also volunteers at the cafe, says there's too much food being wasted.
In the West Midlands alone, we throw away 1,500 tonnes of food every day, and yet there are people not able to eat properly, and there's something very wrong there, so we're trying to do something about it. So it's really amazing. The cafe here in All Saints, we run 3 days a week. We've been open since last November. We've got a lot of regular customers who come through from the local area, and it's a really good community kind of resource. People are kind of making friends and connecting with each other and with food here that they weren't previously, and it's really rewarding seeing the difference that it's making to quite a lot of people's lives here.
The cafe serves a variety of freshly cooked meals, and the volunteers feel it is helping people who are struggling to make ends meet. But are councils and governments the only ones responsible for the current situation? A community activist says that changes need to begin with creating awareness among parents and educating their children about money and wastage.
We need to teach people how to bring up their children, how to budget their money, how to stop wasting stuff, because there's too much waste in this country. People are struggling because we're told you've got to have certain things. We live in England and we're expected to have wall-to-wall carpeting, large screen television, your 8-year-old's supposed to have a mobile phone, you're supposed to have video games, whatever. And people are actually buying these things at the expense of feeding themselves.
The government plans to tackle child poverty by 2020. Further research from the Child Poverty Action Group suggests that 2/3 of the children living in poverty come from working households. However, poor pay and the abuse of zero-hour contracts means that for many people, work is not the only solution.
So that's a short item, incidentally, which we played in we do a weekly current affairs television programme called Second City News, and that was a piece put together by one of my international students, her take on some of the issues to do with child poverty in Birmingham. And I think it highlights a number of points which may well come up in the discussion and debate here. Is it solely about government? Is it issues to do with people having better education? She raised a few issues there, so we will come and views are, because it's a public debate. The idea here is we've got a fantastic panel, but we want to hear what you say as well. Now, I've got a couple of students who will have roving mics. Do you want to just put your hands up so we can see who you are? Anthea up there and Ilka over there. If you can put your hands up, so when we open it to the floor, you can let me know. I'm very good at spotting you. I would ask you, though, please, to start off by saying who you are and identify yourself before you speak, okay? And we will try and make sure that there's no heckling. Why would there be? We're such a nice audience here. We're going to really find out what people want to say and contribute to this topic. But we have got a fantastic panel. We are waiting for our fourth member. This isn't a sort of, David Cameron moment, which...
He's very welcome to join us.
Yeah, he wasn't invited, oddly, but Father Oliver Coss is invited, and he'll be joining us, rushing in shortly, and he will be our fourth panel member. But, I'll start at this end, in actual fact. So I'll introduce him when he comes. The person next to him is Pauline Geoghegan. I'm guessing that the majority of people in this room probably already know you, Pauline. Pauline is the powerhouse that is newsinbrum. She's described herself in the past, she's an ordinary woman who is born and bred in Birmingham, raised kids in Birmingham, so issues to do with the city, particularly issues to do with children and families, I'm right in saying here, Pauline, aren't I? Particularly Get Your Goat. She set up Politics in Brum and News in Brum. She attends almost all the open meetings at the council, tweets. I'm sure many of you are followers of hers on Twitter. and is really about trying to make sure that we have that kind of very vibrant democracy where people, know what's going on, feel informed, and can ask questions. So there's Pauline Geoghegan is our first panel member there. Next to her is Bharat Chauhan. Bharat is head of the School of Nursing, Midwifery and Social Work here at Birmingham City University. I mean, he's obviously got lots of academic qualifications, but particularly keen to have him here because I thought it was 18 years, but it turns out it's something like 922 years as a social worker. That's a slight exaggeration, I think, isn't it? 33, yeah, okay. But he's certainly done his time as a social worker working in the city, so certainly knows a lot of the issues that there are around children and children's welfare. And next to him is Pete Alcock. Pete is a professor of social policy and administration at the University of Birmingham, but also, very interestingly, you're a member of the newly convened BCC Commission on Child Poverty, I think. Again, on top of all the research work that Pete's done, he's also a member of the Joseph Rowntree Trust in terms of their poverty action group. So we've got a really interesting panel. As last time, though, I've asked them just to have a few minutes to talk first, to kick us off, if you like, and then it's over to you. And we're looking for contributions, questions, comments, whatever you want to talk about, because this is about a public debate where we can actually just air issues, maybe even find some solutions, who knows. But can I start, Pauline, with you? We've got, these mics are for you to just have a look at and hold. Are they? They are indeed. Pauline, give us your take then. This is about child poverty in the city. What do you want to tell us?
I think it's great that everybody's here tonight. I don't know if we've ever had an opportunity before as a city to come together from an eclectic mix of backgrounds and for different reasons to explore the level of poverty for children, and that means for families, because children don't live on their own, of course. Whatever affects parents affects children. So I'm interested in the fact that in Birmingham, the figures are skewed because we're a big city with a big child population, but that's not a good enough excuse or explanation. The fact is we've had too much child poverty for generations in a multitude of wards in the city. There's 40 wards in this city, and there's only 4, and they're fortunately for Sutton Coldfield in that part of the city. And we mustn't be jealous of that. We must aspire to the same and to reducing those levels as well. But in every other ward in the city, then they are all above 20%, which is a really sad statement. But besides that, we've got inner city wards, Ladywood, Washwood Heath, the east of Birmingham, but also outlying areas. And we mustn't forget this. A lot of the emphasis in the press is on inner city areas, but the fact is Birmingham is a big city with the largest authority in Europe, and the poverty extends out. So, for example, Shard End, 37%, I think, out in Wheeler Castle, Quinton. You know, there's just as much deprivation hidden in those areas as is prevalent and obvious to the eye in the inner city. And I think the reason that we explored the idea of taking this to a public debate is not because I'm a troublemaker, although a few people at the council think that, and I don't mind, I wear the badge with pride, because the fact is you have to rock the boat a bit to make things come out into the open. If we don't take the topic out into the open, we can't find the solutions as a city together, and we need to get all agencies and all parts of the city working together. So, for example, I know people in the business community who don't know that poverty like this exists, barely would believe it, they don't encounter it, but that doesn't mean they wouldn't care once they know. So I'm optimistic that those things can happen, but it will take a big change of direction politically in this city. And I don't know that it makes any difference who is in charge, because I've never seen any different emphasis. It's on baubles, shiny changes, big buildings. This is all fine as long as you give parallel importance and significance to the things that matter. So it's a big issue, it's complex, it will take everybody together, and it affects health, education, housing, all sorts of things that we're going to talk about and explore today, and they're all interconnected, and it does matter, because we can't have one half of the city feeling okay and the other half really suffering.
Thank you. As you pass the mic on, I'm just going to remind you again that figure, 84,000 children. We are going to talk about definitions of child poverty, I think, in a few minutes' time. But that's quite a figure, and certainly not one I think any of us would be proud of. But that's the Child Poverty Action Group's figure on the number of children living in poverty in the city. Pauline, thank you for that. Bharat, opening comments? That's what we're after here, so over to you.
I'm going to build on the points that Pauline's made. What is poverty in the sense, and can you understand child poverty in isolation of their family? And is it just material? Because the measure and what's been quantified is 37% of children in Birmingham are in poverty. But is it just about money? Do children really have access to their own money? Or is it within the context of their family? And so I think one of the interesting things to look at is, what is it that we're really trying to achieve? We have to impact upon the family. But Every Child Matters, many, many years ago, said that every child should be safe, should be healthy, should enjoy and achieve what? Make a positive contribution. How? Achieve economic well-being. So it's asking serious questions about, well, actually, what do we want children to achieve? And even if we could separate poverty of the child from the parents, what about their emotional poverty or well-being? And does the child necessarily from Sutton Coldfield, are they in poverty in terms of economic well-being? They're not, according to these statistics. But what about emotional and psychological and even social? So for me, the question really is, what is it that we really can achieve meaningfully other than statistics? And that is about change within the community and society. And how do we achieve that? Is it simply the people who live in those impoverished wards, or is it a responsibility for everyone? Which goes to institutions like schools. Children spend most of their time in the school terms at school than perhaps at home, active. And so what is their experience in those situations? What about the children who are impoverished? What are their experiences with the teachers, with their peers? And so for me, it is really about looking at what is it that we're trying to achieve? What is it that we can meaningfully do in all the layers, not just for the family themselves and within the family, but all those who interact with the family. And because one of the effects we really need to address is the effect of stigma, of being seen as poor. Because they're from the poor side, they're bound to be more delinquent, or there are those stereotypes that exist. And so it's about challenging the values. But how do we achieve uniformity in values in society, which is supposed to be free and full of liberties? So I think there are a number of tensions and challenges. So I'd like to sort of set the stall from my perspective, which is about what is it that we can do together, and not simply to influence those who are politicians, but professionals who work with those, but also working within the community, responsible society, responsible community. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Bharat. Again, that's set out your stall. Thank you if you can pass that on. It clearly is very complex, but one of the things I'm going to point out, first of all, that the Kerslake Review did say this isn't about any one council, it's about a series of councils that we've had. It's not about a particular party, it's gone on for longer than that. And the other thing he pointed to was things like, which it seems to me are things you can address, the lack of skills. We've got double the amount of unskilled people in this city than the rest of the country. You know, that's quite a shocking figure. Surely there's a link between that and poverty. So I think there are some things that we can perhaps tease out here today. But Pete, if I can come to you, give us your take.
Around 50 years ago, in 1965, a group of academics and campaigners came together and formed an organisation called the Child Poverty Action Group to campaign around child poverty. 50 years later, we're sitting here talking about child poverty. You might wonder how successful they've been in tackling the problem. But in some ways, it's more deep-seated than that. The first serious research academic research on poverty was carried out by Seabohm Rowntree, part of the Rowntree chocolate factory family in York. And his research revealed that it was families with children who were most at risk of poverty back at the end of the 19th century. Shortly after they came to power in 1998, 1999, the Labour government under Tony Blair made a pledge that the government would eradicate child poverty in the United Kingdom by 2020 and would seek to halve levels of child poverty by 2010. So there's also no lack of political commitment centrally from government, or at least from the last Labour government, to do something about child poverty. So why is it that child poverty still exists to the extent that it does? That's not an easy question to answer, and if child poverty was an easy problem to crack, then surely we would have done something about it before now. It's a problem which is not only British, of course, it extends outside of Britain, and it's a problem that isn't just found in Birmingham. Birmingham's a large city, it has a large population, and it has quite a young population, and therefore quite a large number of children. But it's not uniquely a Birmingham problem, and it's not something that Birmingham alone can tackle. Part of the debate about poverty can be a debate about how you define or measure poverty. And there are different ways of defining and measuring poverty, and depending upon which you choose or which you take, you'll get some different notion of the extent of poverty, the depth of poverty, and whether it's getting worse or better. The figures that have been quoted so far come from the government's annual statistics, which they're called the Households Below Average Income Statistics, and they look at information about household incomes, and they compare people's household incomes before and after their housing costs, and they count as poor those people or those households that fall below 60% of the median income. That's just over half of the midpoint on the income scale. That's treated as a measure of poverty. It's a proxy measure of poverty, of course, and to some extent it's a self-defeating measure of poverty, because if everybody got richer, you'd still have the same number of people in poverty. So it raises some difficult questions about how we define and measure poverty. On that measure, however, child poverty is more serious than poverty amongst non-child households without children in them. There is some evidence, continuing evidence, that families with children show a greater risk and therefore a greater proportion of people in poverty. The national figure for families with children after their housing costs is around 25%. The figure in Birmingham is around 37%, over a third, and as Diane was pointing out before, in some wards in the city it reaches almost a half. So there's a distribution of that income measure of poverty which suggests that it's unequally distributed geographically across the country, with cities like Birmingham having higher levels, and within Birmingham with particular wards having higher levels. There's a danger, however, in just taking that geographical picture and assuming that we should focus our action on poverty in areas like Sparkbrook and Nechells, where the figures are high, because of course there are poor people and poor children living in Sutton Coldfield too. So, depending upon how we define poverty, we get different measures. If we look at it geographically, we get a different distribution, but that shouldn't disguise us from the fact that poverty is a multidimensional problem. It's about income, but it's not only about income. It's about how you can use that income, and it's about other dimensions of your lifestyle and your circumstances, the housing that you live in, the area that you live, in the case of people in employment, the employment and the circumstances of their employment, and of course it's about health too. It's multifaceted, and therefore there are a number of ways in which we can respond to it. We can only hope to do so much in Birmingham. Nevertheless, it's interesting that it was picked up by the Kerslake Committee, and as Diane mentioned, the City Council have just recently established a Child Poverty Commission here in the city. And I think the City Council is to be applauded for taking this initiative, and they see it as a multi-agency approach to the problem of child poverty. So I hope those of you that are concerned about it, and I guess that's why you're here, will find out about the work of the Commission and try and work with them and join in the consultation meetings that they'll be having over the next 6 months or so. In that sense, this is an opportune time to raise the issue of child poverty. although, and I'll come back to this later if you want, I think there are limits to what we can expect to achieve. We can make a difference. That doesn't mean that we'll eradicate the problem.
Thank you. You raise a whole series of things there, which I think you're right, we will definitely come back to. But can I just introduce Father Oliver Coss, who's arrived just in the nick of time. Have a seat, Oliver. First of all, welcome. I'm going to give you 2 seconds to take your coat off. That's about it. And if you want to have a seat and take the microphone, I've just asked people to give us their opening comments, if you like, about poverty, child poverty in the city. And just by words of introduction, Father Oliver is a Church of England vicar for Small Heath, which is kind of, well, certainly got, it's an area that has many of the issues that we've been talking about. But I notice on your Twitter feed you refer to it as the East End of the city, which it has more than one connotation. So, right, Oliver, do you want to give us a few opening comments before we kick off and ask the audience to join in?
You call it the East End, it sounds very glam. That was.
I was thinking more about the, get out, he's not worth it. But there we are. That's just me.
Yeah, we do that too. But yeah, I think when I've been thinking about this over the last few days and trying to kind of crystallise my thoughts and my kind of priority when it comes to child poverty, or indeed any kind of poverty that affects the vulnerable. But I think in particular, when it comes to child poverty, there are a couple of approaches I have to it. The first one is a kind of a base humanitarian approach that I didn't want to see other people suffer because I worry that it might be me suffering at some point. And I think doing to others as you would like to be done by is not purely a Christian idea, but quite a basic humanitarian one. My second emphasis is on being a parent myself to a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old, and the sense that I don't want them to grow up with the kind of appalling struggles that so many people deal with. And happily, as long as the Church of England don't fire me, I'm trying to say something too outrageous, then I have some confidence that at least they will grow up in a household where there's a degree of provision for them. So I worry as a parent as well, and worry in that kind of, if you like, a sort of a fellow feeling sort of way about other parents. The most important emphasis to me is one that isn't a base or an instinctive emphasis, but one that I have learnt to love as I have grown as a Christian. And that is what Jesus says about children in St. Matthew's Gospel in chapter 18, verse 10, when he says, "Never hinder the little ones, because their angels are constantly appearing before the face of God." And that's my own emphasis. That's the emphasis that I hope that other people who dress a little bit like me, or who claim to worship a little bit like me, would hold as well. But that's something which comes to define an approach. And I want to separate that out and sort of say that I don't think the Christian approach is necessarily better, but I want to say that there's a defining approach that sort of says there is something beyond all this, which is of great significance. I think that child poverty is one of the great scandals of our time, despite the fact that in my own ward, child poverty has declined by something like 15% since 2007. I think that's miraculous. I really do. To say that in 2007, 65% of children and young people who lived in Nechells were in poverty, and today the figure looks a little bit like sort of 36 to 45, depending on where you are. So in my patch, it's 36%. In my colleague, Father Nicholas Lopolito's patch in Highgate, it's 50%. So 1 in 2 of the kids you meet are going to be in poverty. And I do think it's a national scandal. The greatest scandal is that nobody seems scandalised by it. And that is profoundly troubling. The day that Pauline and I were talking to Adrian Goldberg about this debate was the day that everyone else was talking about Jeremy Clarkson. Well, frankly, this might get me fired, I could give a crap about Jeremy Clarkson. But I worry about those issues. Now, this sounds very glib, very simplistic, and there are complex needs that need even more complex solutions to tackle them. The advances that have been made since 2007 are fantastic. They are a miraculous work. They are a wonderful thing. And now we are centering down into needs that are not just simply about providing better employment or better opportunity, but actually tackling very, very serious and complex issues that affect children and families in our city. But I think my main point is that I want to be scandalised by child poverty a bit more, because it is a scandal.
Well, I think we're going to be hearing from people in the audience who are themselves scandalised. I might just add to that, by the way, that rather sadly, I think more people signed the online petition to keep him than signed the one against female genital mutilation. It's just so wrong, isn't it? But thank you very much for your contribution. I'm now going to open it to the floor. We're going to do what we did last time, which is take a number of people's comments and views from the floor. If you've got questions for the panel, that's great. We'll save them up. We'll have a number of comments, and then we'll come back to the panel for thoughts, and then back out again. This gentleman's got his hand up there, Ilka. And if there's anybody down here, I must say the last debate we had, one side of the room worked faster than the other side. So if I could just cajole this side of the room to kind of, oh, there we are, there's a hand there. Antia will come here. And then I've got this gentleman at the back. Well, I'll see you all. But if I can start with you. And please remember to tell us who you are before you make your point. Thank you. It's on. It's on.
1, 2. That's better. My name is Anthony St John. I'm also the chair of Unite Communities, and I'm also with Outreach for the Homeless. Now, I noticed not one of the panel mentioned about the homeless children in the streets. Has everybody forgot all about these kids? Because these are the most vulnerable of all people, the ones that's out on the streets. I know of 2 that's actually died out on the streets. You know, why isn't the council concentrating a lot more and doing a lot more for these people? Thank you.
Thank you. I will mention here that, in fact, in all the panels, what we decided to do was not to go for, if you like, the usual suspects. We haven't gone for council colleagues. They're very welcome here, and I don't know if we have any in the room. We certainly had a number of councillors turn up at the last debate. But it was more about trying to get some different voices and thoughts on this. But thank you for that. This lady here. Tell us who you are.
Hi, I'm Anne Gallagher. I grew up in Small Heath. I now live on the edge of Ladywood. I was a teacher for a long time in the inner city, so I was very aware of child poverty and the outcomes of child poverty. I'm a child who grew up in child poverty. I'm the eldest of 9 children. I've got 7 siblings living. I've got 3 daughters and 8 grandchildren, so this issue really concerns me. A couple of years ago, Chamberlain Forum did some work on connected communities are more resilient. There's lots of talk in Birmingham at the top, and really what has happened at the top has caused all of this. The concentration by government on all kinds of things at the top. Let's keep business happy. Let's inspect everybody to within an inch of their lives. I was a teacher. I got cancer. I don't know whether that was due to stress, and I mean that really seriously. My cousin's daughter's training to be a teacher. It's horrendous. You know, the kid has no time at all. I would challenge everybody and say, do you know what's on your doorstep? Because actually we are doing lots of things in Birmingham, and there's things like places of welcome, which I would say, you know, everybody should find out about. There's things like time banking. I'm a volunteer for the Real Junk Food Project, and they've just joined our time bank. The truth is now, work and education won't get you out of poverty. That's the sad fact. We need to share out the paid work. Greed is the root of poverty. What are we doing in a city where some people who have police and crime commissioner, he's a retired MP, he's a retired head teacher, and he's taking 100 grand salary. And when I asked him at the hustings, would he give up 50 grand? He laughed at me. He laughed at me. Now, sadly, that man did not realise I'm not an easy, you know, I don't take being laughed at easily, but actually the ignorance of laughing at anyone in that audience who'd made the effort to come in their own time. I think there's lots of really good things going on, but we're not necessarily enabling those things to carry on and to succeed. It's really quite hard if you want to do good work, if you like. It's not easy to do it. And I think we need to be saying to everybody has a responsibility, every single one of us. There are 720 hours in a month. Only 100 of those are spent in school. So 620 are spent at home. And actually, most kids don't sleep that much if you talk to most parents. That's my take on it.
Thank you. This gentleman at the back there. Yep.
Hello, my name's Jolyon. I think the issue of stigma's been raised, but I mean, I think nobody's talked about so far the government's welfare reforms and the intent of the welfare reforms. There seems to be a very anodyne, apolitical discussion. Now, I think unfortunately, Birmingham is the home of Benefit Street, and I think the production company that actually made that vile programme, night after night, if you watch Channel 4, people who are on benefits, claimants, are being stigmatised. And this is being done in a very deliberate, concerted way. This isn't an accident. Stigma is not some form of accident. But this has to be seen in concert with the Tories' intent with regards to welfare reform. And I think there's been some recent research regarding the impact of benefit sanctions and the whole benefit sanctions regime on families and upon children. And I have a couple of questions. One to Peter in regards to the commission that's being re-established, and one to the scrutiny chair for the Vulnerable Children's Committee. And that is, do we know how many children in Birmingham are going to bed hungry as a direct result of their parents being sanctioned by the Department of Work and Pensions? And if we don't know that, we should know that, because that's another layer to the issue of poverty. This is a deliberate attack on families and upon children. But the question then I have in terms of the City Council is, one of its big projects, one of its big sources of funding is troubled families. Now, an explicit part of this is the crafting on of a child welfare programme with the policies of Mr. Pickles. And the question I have is in regards to Birmingham Council is the lead with regards to troubled families. It also has a protocol with regards to the use of sanctions. I would like an assurance that people who are the subject of the Troubled Families programme, that their families and their children are not subject to DWP sanctions which leave their children hungry.
Okay, thank you. In fact, you raised, yes. You raised a couple of questions. Let's come back to the panel to take some of their points. And I mean, I would actually say their comments are theirs, and we welcome them. I wouldn't describe them as anodyne. They are their own.
Called anodyne for a change.
And it's great to have them. But that's why it's in public debate, because we've got, I suspect in this room we've got pretty much every comment and thought there might be. Let's hear them all. So please, let's hear back from the panel, but then keep those hands or indicate to me so I can see where the mics have to go next. All right. Yeah, okay. And it'd be lovely to hear some more from the women in the room as well. That would be brilliant. So Pete, do you want to pick that up? Because there was one directly for you. Yeah, either of those mics is fine. Yeah, either of them.
Do we know how many children are living in benefit sanctioned affected families? I'm not sure we know that in an accessible form. Obviously, the DWP will have a list of the number of families that have been benefit sanctioned. I must admit, I don't know how up to date the statistics that they currently provide are, or how accessible they are, and whether they're broken down nationally, so you can find out how many of those are in Birmingham. So as a practical matter, somebody would need to do a bit of research on the DWP data, but I suspect that we don't know that yet because it's too new and the data hasn't come out. And when it does come out, whether it will allow you to break it down by city, I don't know that either. Whether they go to bed hungry, of course, we don't know. I mean, one can guess that they might if the household is losing its benefits income. But
what about some of the other comments you've heard, though, Pete? Do you want to give either a reaction to that or give us some more from your own experience on the subject?
Yeah. And the point about homeless children too, I mean, I don't know whether there is an official count of the number of homeless children in the city. I suspect not, because it's not too easy to count them, either to find them or to number them all. Oh, clearly it's a serious problem. And of course, child poverty is a serious problem. But as I said before, it's not a new problem. And although we know quite a lot about the different dimensions of them, none of them are terribly easy to tackle. If it was an easy problem to solve, we would have solved it by now. It is linked, of course, to the distribution of income. And if we provided a larger income to those with families and children, then we may be able to alleviate the extent of poverty to some extent. And it's perhaps worrying that child benefit, which has traditionally been seen as one of the main strategic ways of addressing the issue of child poverty, has been held, the value of child benefit has been held back by the current government since 2010, and also it's now subject to a means-tested regime, which means it doesn't go to the families of the relatively better off. Now, you might say, well, surely that's a good thing. If we're concerned about child poverty, why should we be paying child benefit to the children of to children in relatively better off households? The point about child benefit was that it was a payment to meet some of the costs of caring for children. And all children experience those costs, and all families need to meet them. It had 100% take-up, which most of the benefits focused upon poor families do not have. Not everybody claims them. Everybody claimed child benefit. It was easy to understand, and it made a significant difference to the income of households with children across the board. And as I said earlier, for over 100 years now, we've known that families with children are at greater risk of poverty. One of the ways of tackling that at source is to raise the income of all families with children. So I'm disappointed that child benefit has been held back, and I'm disappointed that it's been means tested. I don't know whether a change of government will lead to a change in that. I hope that it would. Labour have been fairly quiet about what they would do about the means testing of child benefit, no doubt because they'd be asked how they would pay for that in the priorities that they would face. But I think it is an important issue, and it's one dimension of campaigning that we might want to think about. Should we be campaigning to restore child benefit as a universal provision?
Thank you. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Bharat, do you want to pick that? Can I just forewarn the panel that near the end, though, I am going to ask you all to, if you could think of one measure that would have a direct impact, that you might think about that. Okay. Bharat, over to you.
I mean, as Oliver said, poverty is scandalous, and adult poverty impacts upon the child. And I raise the issue about every child matters. Well, obviously, the impact has been every child does not matter if poverty is identified. And using economic criteria is one thing, but it is about focusing on, homeless children, homeless people. That's scandalous. But what can we do about it? What should we do about it? And I think it's that tension between what can we do about it? Now, are we willing to do it? And so every time we walk past certain parts of the city centre and you see homeless people about 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night trying to find a shop, a little opening to lie down in. And the concern for me, and it's something which sort of, because I too have children, and whenever you see somebody on the street who appears in the cold, perhaps with some food or begging, is this scandalous? Of course it is. So what's gone wrong? Well, Peter said that poverty has been around forever. However, we have identified as a society and made strong commitment for every child matters. So how can we make every child matter? And that is the challenge that we have.
I'm going to push you a bit further, though, Bharat.
Please
You've
do.
been a social worker in the city for decades.
I have.
We've seen that figures say that we have, really appalling pockets of poverty. It's not just a sort of, it's not there for no reason. What have you noted through your own professional work that's contributed to the fact that Birmingham, do we want to be known for this? We're topping polls as having some of the worst deprivation in the UK. Why?
Birmingham's been known for deprivation since the Sparkbrook studies, going back to the 60s. And one of the Every Child Matters is enjoy and achieve. So does a child living in an impoverished family not enjoy and achieve? In fact, many successful people have come and emerged from poverty. And so we need to look at, what about the children who are not enjoying or achieving because they're unhappy? So for me, and some of the things which I take up with the students and colleagues, and from my experience as a social worker, I've been to many, many households over since the 80s, in a private capacity as well as a professional capacity. And you see children in households which would be very impoverished, very poor, but there is happiness. But I've also been in households which are quite well furnished and lots of material things, but there's a lot of sadness. And that's the great tension. But if I can just end on this point, that, so I think it is a challenge which each of us has to take up. What are we willing to do? What can we do? And that's going to remain something which each of us has to really take up.
Okay. I know there are some social workers, people who work in the community here in the room, so no names or pack drill, but I'm going to be coming to you shortly, so just a friendly warning there. Pauline, give us your take, first of all, on some of the comments you've heard, or anything else you want to add to the debate so far.
I think we can hypothesise on what poverty feels like, and I agree that poverty of opportunity and experience matters. I come from a large family. There were 6 children. I didn't have much in life apart from food and a home, and I certainly did feel deprived as a child, and I was hungry, and we did experience difficulty. I've also been a woman who was divorced and brought 3 children up on my own, and I could probably horrify people with some of the things I have had to go through. So I know how that feels, and so my comments are born out of experience. I like to pick up on what Jolyon said. My work looking at the behaviour and priorities of Birmingham City Council at times horrifies me. I was at a meeting where there was a big discussion going on about what was going to happen to the local welfare fund, which was put in place by the Conservative coalition to replace crisis funding. And it was almost incidental to the group there. It was a minor conversation, which I'm sure the rest of the councillors on the council wouldn't even have been privy to or known was going to happen, because these things do not go out to the councillors. It goes to the group that are actually meeting. It was a scrutiny group. And the discussion went like this. There's a recommendation to cut the funding by, I think it was 75%. Don't quote me on that one, but I know that there was a bit of, well, can we really do that? Well, why would we be doing that? Because it's not being used. That funding is not being used, and this is a real slur on the council, I think, because they never promoted it properly. And to access it, you need to be digitally very adept. You need to own an iPhone, a computer. Advice centres are the access point, or a nominated person. It is horrendous trying to access that. And I think, okay, it's complex, but there are certain things that are simple, and giving people who are at risk access, and that is absolutely about vulnerable children and families. And when they were actually setting the system up, it was a kibosh with credit card being given out and people having to go to certain supermarket that I'm not going to promote here, even though I sometimes do go there because their clothes aren't too bad, George. I might be wearing one, actually. No, I think that's really important, and I do agree with Jolyon. This city has suffered disproportionate cuts. I don't feel unaffected by that. I don't think it doesn't matter. It is outrageous the way this city has been targeted and penalised politically. Yes, it doesn't matter what side of the coin you sit on. We can't deny that. And the impact is on the most vulnerable. But we also need our council, such as it is, whatever size it is, however many councillors there are, to get their act together and start prioritising and focusing, on the most vulnerable. Because if you've got a job and a home and you're secure, you don't give a damn what the council are doing, and except it's about green waste.
Thank you. Okay. As Oliver takes the microphone, can I see some hands? And I know there's a couple of people waiting, but we've got some more who are ready to comment and join in. Oliver, over to you.
think I really agree with what Pauline was saying about the disproportionality of things. But well, absolutely. They clapped you. I assume they all agree with you. It's fine. You pay them, okay. Well, not the dodgy politician. But it's the disproportionality is
dodgy.
No, absolutely. Well, I was just about to give a good example, but in a funny sort of way. But
You won't have a job.
no, well, absolutely. I'll go and lie down. I think at times the disproportionality has been coloured in Birmingham by a kind of titanic political battle going on between a council run by one party and a government run by other people, and I'll lay that one out there. And that's I'll try not to do too much more politics. When you were making your point earlier, so you're quite right about not doing politics. I hope you won't expect me to do too much of it, but I thought of the Vicar of Dibley and this wonderful line that David Horton used on the radio, and he said that clergy should keep their communist conks out of politics. And I've always used that as my kind of watchword, but very occasionally we find reasons to either try to positively reinforce, because many of us who wear a white collar are finding ourselves often in isolated positions, kind of working at things that nobody else are doing. And when I speak to politicians, and I try to speak to politicians as people, what I generally get back is the kind of the loneliness of that, and the point of isolation from which they're often functioning. Which is, it's not very often you get that kind of honesty in conversation. It doesn't last very long. It's a short conversation, but I think just that little bit of vulnerability, that politicians are people too. One particular example I'll give is relates to my parish straddles a parliamentary boundary. Half of it's in Birmingham Ladywood, and half of it's in Birmingham Yardley. And over the Trojan horse crisis and one or two other things, I had quite a lot to do with John Hemming. He's a Lib Dem, nobody's perfect. And I saw in that man, despite kind of a multitude of reasons to think that a lot of the stuff he does is entirely off the wall, or that he's a Lib Dem and that's barking enough, or whatever else. But the work that he was doing in his constituency to try and shore up a school that was sinking fast into the water at the height of that crisis. At other points, and his work as not necessarily doing anything, but acting as a coordinating point, a rallying point for people who are trying to tackle food poverty and food waste in particular, about a year ago, was actually really impressive. I can't vote for him because I don't live in his constituency, so this is entirely moot, and I don't offer any advice on that at all. But I think the role that churches have tried to take when we haven't been actually engaged in action ourselves, or even despite the fact we've been engaged in action ourselves, is to try and be a counsellor to people who have that role. And that relies on access, it relies on walking alongside people, whether it's walking alongside people who are going through the most crippling poverty, or whether it's walking alongside people who are in politics and trying to inject into their life something that would make it, that would transfigure it, make it a little bit better. Just on homelessness, obviously you're very right, and we haven't spoken about it, and I haven't spoken about it. And I think homelessness represents the kind of the rock bottom. Perhaps somebody will disagree with that, but it represents the rock bottom of poverty. And there are lots and lots and lots of different levels that go in between that. Because the Church of England provides ridiculously large houses for its clergy, I live in quite a big house, and officially I'm in fuel poverty, which is daft in a way. And then going down many, many different levels from that and seeing the experiences of people who, for lots and lots of different reasons, have got there. And I think that's why I talk about the complexity of the issue. There are no simple solutions. There are kind of one-shot wonders that have a chance at addressing the needs of a particular group, whether it's homeless, whether it's people who have recently arrived in the UK, whether it's people who are tackling unemployment, whether it's people who aren't being given a fair wage and who are in poverty despite the fact that they're working all the hours God sends, and the absurdity of that, or whether there are other things. That there are kind of complex needs that need complex solutions, and I think the main thing is just not being beguiled by the complexity. Saying that a one-shot wonder that tackles one element of poverty is okay, because that's one more prong into this kind of stagnant pool that we've allowed to build up, I think. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, thank you, Oliver. I just see some hands up. So I've got this gentleman here, got a gentleman there, this lady here, and this lady there, and then we'll come round again.
Yeah, I'm Stuart Richardson. I'm an activist in Birmingham against the cuts. And I think that we can't avoid the fact that we're a couple of months from a general election. And it's very important to say that the present government are planning major cuts in welfare. One of the things they're doing is working family credit. It's going to be limited to 1%. All these measures have been voted for by the Labour Party, and there was a vote in Parliament recently about imposing a billions of pounds of cuts. Again, all the mainstream parties, the Tories, the Labour Party, and the Liberal Democrats voted for that. Interestingly, the Scottish Nationalists and the Plaid Cymru didn't. So there are voices in British politics. Nicola Sturgeon is quite an articulate one of opposing austerity. Now, what you've got to start from is really this statement by Ed Balls. We will not reverse the coalition cuts. Actually, he goes much further than that. He's got a plan for tens of billions of pounds of extra cuts in the next few years. Probably not at the exact scale of the present government, but the same level of cuts. And I just want to talk about two things that are affecting children in Birmingham as a result of these Labour policies. One of the speakers said, children need to be safe. Now, the City Council has run its child protection service for the last 10 years. They've been found by inquiry after inquiry to be failing. Children have been killed in Birmingham. Children have been brutalised. The City Council underfunds child protection compared with other metropolitan boroughs, Manchester, Leeds, etc., by £40 million. There are 100 vacancies in the child protection service. There are child protection officers, instead of having about 20 cases, have 40 cases. When Bridget Jones was asked at a budget consultation meeting, would she be willing to make a public campaign saying that this dramatic underfunding, because of government underfunding, should be reversed, and therefore Birmingham children should be safe, she refused to respond to that. She refused to take the political measures necessary to protect Birmingham children. I'll just mention one other thing. We are facing drastic cuts in the library service. We have this new, magnificent new library. 1 year after it's been opened, 100 librarians are being sacked. Qualified, trained people being sacked. The hours are going to be reduced to 72 to 60. Now, if you come from a poor family, libraries are very important in terms of access to homework material, to study. So the actions of this council on those two things are intensifying child poverty and child inequality in this city. We've got to say that absolutely clearly, and that's why we're campaigning against these cuts. And just lastly, there is a protest tomorrow outside the ICC when Ed Miliband is speaking, who's planning further cuts, to ask him, does he support this sacking of 100 librarians in the Birmingham Council? Is he going to reverse that, or is he going to continue the axing of the Birmingham libraries, which is planned by this present council? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we have this lady here while we wait for the mic to come down. Mel, tell us who you are.
Hello, I'm Mel Wakeman. I'm lecturer here in nutrition at Birmingham City University. And I have a huge interest professionally in terms of childhood nutrition, and also personally in terms of having young children myself. And I've been listening, and I've been thinking about what the basic human rights are for children in terms of having a roof over their head, having access to heating, being safe, being loved. But also I think food is incredibly important. And I think particularly recently the West Midlands has got a huge bad press again in terms of the most unhealthiest towns, the high levels of obesity, and there seems to be so much focus on the overweight and the obesity issues that we seem to forget that children are going hungry, that they are severely malnourished, And then that leads me into thinking, okay, so we've got thousands of children that are going to school hungry. We have a huge expectation that children are supposed to achieve in school. Yet how can they possibly achieve when they're not being fed correctly? They don't have access to food. And then that links into our underskilled workforce. So this is obviously an incredibly urgent issue that needs addressing now, that has huge implications and ramifications for the future. And I'm aware that, that again, there's a huge demand for accessing food via food banks, that we see those as potentially a very effective solution at the moment, but not necessarily in the long term. And interestingly, even with my students this week, we've been analysing formulating menus from the foods that are available from food banks, and there are a number of sort of rules and regulations or limitations about what can be offered through food banks. And actually, if you are to formulate a menu to feed your family from the food that is provided from a food bank, which in itself is a very difficult exercise sometimes, that in the long term, there's a real risk of children and families being malnourished. There are some nutrients in there that are sort of on the bottom level. So that has all sorts of implications in terms of health and further burdens and costs as a result of that. So, yeah, that was my sort of throw into the mix.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, a round of applause. Over there. Thank you.
Okay, are we on? Yes.
Who are
My name's Richard Hatcher, and I work for BCU, but I'm speaking as an active member of Birmingham Against the Cuts, like Stuart earlier. And I think in this discussion, if we're going to get anywhere, we have to focus on the causes of the issue that we're discussing. And the first line of causes is straightforward. Child poverty is the policy of this government. They've taken measures quite deliberately that will quite predictably create and worsen child poverty. You can see it in the key policies that they have, and they've been mentioned. There are cuts in services, there are cuts in benefits, and in particular, the lack of jobs and the huge number of low-paid jobs. And Birmingham absolutely epitomises this. In the 64 largest towns and cities in the country, Birmingham comes number 58 in the percentage of the working population that is unemployed, and 59th for young people. And not only the lack of jobs, but the jobs that do exist are often poorly paid. In fact, I see in the paper just the other day that Northfield has a higher percentage of its workforce on wages below the living wage than any other area of the country. I also see in the paper that Birmingham is a hotspot for 0 hours contracts. So lack of jobs and lots of crap jobs as well. Now, the problem with Kerslake, one of the many problems with Kerslake, is that he essentially says the problem is lack of skills. Now, of course, it's true there are some skill shortages, but that's not the key problem. And actually, it's also a problem that's largely a legacy of the past, in the sense that actually the qualifications of Birmingham school leavers now are above the national average. This is to the tremendous credit of the teachers in our schools, because Birmingham has a high level of poverty, but nevertheless, the schools overall are doing well. Now, of course, we know within that there are many kids not doing so well. We understand that. But you can't simply blame it on low skills. Why aren't there lots of jobs available for young people, and older people as well, that are jobs below degree level? Why aren't there those sort of jobs in manufacturing? And the answer is, and this is what's not mentioned by Kerslake or the politicians, that capital, private capital, the private sector, is not interested in investing in manufacturing. And why isn't it interested in it? Because there's not enough profit in it. And we know this. I mean, even papers like The Economist and so on say, yes, this is the big problem. Lack of investment, therefore no jobs, therefore child poverty. But there is one area in the city which is attracting huge amounts of investment, and that is the city centre. You only have to look at the huge development projects throughout the city centre. I was astonished at the figures. Last year, the investment in offices in the city centre grew over the previous year by 800%. 800%. Why is that? Because there are huge profits to be made out of building and selling office blocks, and there are huge profits to be made by big global countries like Deutsche Bank and so on from occupying those office blocks and making huge amounts of money out of it. But do they create any jobs for Birmingham people? Yes, for a layer of the most privileged, but not for the majority that live out in East Birmingham or wherever. Now the council, I'm just finishing, but the council frequently trumpets, and has just done recently, 2 big job creation schemes. You have to look closely at those. Those schemes are not directly to invest in productive jobs. They are schemes to develop skills, to develop transport connectivity, and so forth. They're about the infrastructure, but there's a hollow in the middle waiting for private capital to fill. And the fact is, it's not very interested in filling it. And so it seems likely that those figures will stay the same. I'll just give you one figure, which is about the two. Yeah, I will finish in just a second. The big instrument for the government for creating jobs, supposedly, are the LEPs, the local enterprise partnerships. We have 2 LEPs, one in Birmingham Solihull, one in the Black Country. Together, since 2011, when they were set up, they have created the equivalent of 1 new job for every 400 existing jobs. They've mopped up millions and millions of pounds and proved themselves quite incapable of making anything more than a dent in the employment statistics. So we need a government of a different sort, one that's going to put social need in front of the profit that drives the property market, but not jobs for our people.
Thank you. I'm going to get you to put the microphone just behind you. Thank you. Incidentally, Richard, the kind of comments you're making there, I hope you're going to join us when we talk about leadership in the city, and also the issue about buildings and infrastructure, transport, because I think, this is one of those things that people get very hot under the collar about, where the money goes and the development. But thank you. Let's hear from Sue behind you. I happen to know it's Sue. Sue, tell us one.
Hi, I'm Sue Ball. I've lived and worked in Birmingham for about 35 years, mainly in education and community education. And I feel like, I can't remember all your names now, but like you said, scandalised about child poverty and shocked and furious about the cuts that people have mentioned already. And I could rant and rave about that for a very long time, but I'm going to just focus on something else. I was quite pleased that in your introduction you showed some positive work that was going on, and that somebody else mentioned work that was going on positively as well. And I think I just want to kind of do a shout out for all the people who are actually working in the field of dealing with child poverty, especially in schools or in social work or in community work. And I think really we hardly ever acknowledge some of the excellent work that is going on that has led to the kind of changes that you referred to. Part of what I'm involved in at the moment is I'm the chair of a community organisation in Nechells called The Pod, which some of you may have heard of. And I'm not going to really say very much about that, except to say it's one example of a place where there's really positive work going on. And I think it's very important for us to kind of shout about that a little bit more, or investigate it a little bit more. What is it that's working? What are the I'm furious. I've got to tell you, I'm furious about all the things that you talked about. But I also want to feel that we can think about what are the solutions, what is positive, what can we learn from the good things and the good work that's going on already, and what new ideas and fresh ideas can we have to help people in Nechells or wherever they are to get out of their poverty. I'm kind of with the guy who talks about well-being though as well, because I think that is an important factor, and I think connection that somebody mentioned over there is really important as well. So I'd like to kind of say that for me, community-based work is absolutely essential, and I hope that funds will be available to continue that kind of work, because it is being cut at the moment, and it is as a result of government policy. I agree with all that. But I hope in Birmingham maybe we can find some ways of dealing with it. I don't know how, but maybe somebody can help from the panel.
Okay. We've got another couple of points from the floor there, and then I'll come back to you, this gentleman here, after we come back to the panel. But I want to take two more from the floor before we come to the panel. There's quite a few things to think about here, positives as well as a whole raft of negatives, that sense of, well, you know, lots of things have been outlined here. What can be done? What you were talking, Oliver, about, you know, particular things that might be achieved. So mull on that while we have two more comments, and I'm going to come back to you. So this young gentleman here, tell us who you are.
My name's Luke Holland. I'm 17 and I live in Kings Heath. Don't judge me on my age.
No, it's good to hear from you.
Welcome to Birmingham 2015. Birmingham, where more and more Brummies are relying on food banks, where 37% of our children live in poverty, and a city with an ever-increasing homeless population. Yet our councillors are crying about losing a private car park. With £85 million worth of cuts, the stats will only get worse and worse. As a city, we must think about what's best for Birmingham and not what will win the councillors' and leaders' votes. This city council thinks about the rich and the poor. The council approves more and more luxury apartments, yet leaves over 9,000 properties empty over the city. This is an outrage. This city is a tale of two stories, a tale of the rich and a tale of the poor who live next to each other. Moseley is a classic example. It was rated the best place to live in the UK this week. It's not so great for the 30.2% of children who live in poverty. As a city, we must pull together, fight for fairer funding, put party politics to the side, and make Birmingham a great city for all.
Okay, thank you very much. Oh. Okay, one more comment. Can I just say, there's obviously, I mean, can I just ask, are there councillors in the room? Because if there are, we'd love to hear, right, they're sitting together, right, great. Can we hear from you at some point? Because I'm sure you are also part of the debate. Not having you on the panel is because we don't want to hear from you. It's simply because we want to hear other voices. And when it becomes very close to a general election, things can become rather polarised. And we're keen to avoid that. But we will come to you if you would like to speak to us. So, yes, please identify yourself.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Chris Webb. I've run a company in Birmingham for 20 years within PR and marketing. First of all, I think it's brilliant everyone's come out tonight on a wet Friday the 13th. I think it's a testament to the interest in this issue. My point is I want to tell you a little story that I experienced in my working life. I grew up in the inner city in Birmingham in a single-parent family. I've seen the end of a margarine tub when me and my brother have been fighting over who's going to have the next piece of toast. So I understand when people have been in peril, and I also understand, I'd like to think, poverty in part. I've definitely witnessed it. Growing up in Ladywood, Lee Bank, Winson Green, I went to a couple of different comprehensive schools, and luckily enough I educated myself enough to get out of what people would call the ghetto or the backwaters of Birmingham. It is a scandal what's going on. Half the city are hungry, and we're all in bed not worrying, we're watching Gogglebox. My point is this. I went to a meeting with 10 of the most prominent business operators in the city to pitch for an account to promote a massive development down at Brindley Place, just next door to Ladywood. Whilst being shown around the top floor, the 6th floor, the penthouse, if you like, I just pointed out to the gentleman from the huge development company telling me how great Birmingham was and the canal side view. What do you think of that place, mate? I wouldn't park my car there. I looked at him, I said, wow, I grew up there. And he wanted my advice. So I think the key here is that it's not just, I think there's a consistency issue, because another story I could tell you, which I'll be very quick because I know we all want to speak. I engaged 6 months ago with a charity, stroke social enterprise in Birmingham called Free at Last. It's a charity for young people. It's an anti-gang, it's a whatever we can do type situation. And it is a hub. The gentleman that runs it has not really had any funding of any sort, nothing worth talking about. And he was on his knees, but he was very proud and he wouldn't beg. I met him by chance at a networking event and he touched me. I'm not a man of faith. I've got no political agenda. I'm a Brummie. I love my town. And I've got a kid. I said to him, what do you do, mate? He said, I try and make the lives of kids in Nechells better any way I can. I took a guy to see a mountain the other day. He cried in front of me. And I looked at him and I thought, what am I doing? I can help. I've got a big mouth, as you can all tell. I'm not scared of knocking doors. I'll pick up a phone and I'll ask that question. So I did. And I went out and I spoke to 3 businesses locally to Nechells and I said, do you know that there are roof leaks? He said, oh, they steal our cars. I said, they steal your cars? I said, do you know what? This is the future. You need to bind yourself with the youth around here. They won't steal your cars. They'll protect your cars. He gave us £25,000 the following day. Philanthropic, no agenda. I asked him, would you like some press? Because I can get people in the paper. It's part of my job. He said, no. A good deed is reward enough. There was no tax break. He did it because he cared. I'm a Brummie. I don't know how many of you lot are Brummies, but I put my hand up tonight and I'm in. I will work. I will talk to businesses. It's not about businesses. This council is out of control. Legacy. You're crazy. It's about the youth. It's a right mess. We need to sort it out. And that's all I've got to say. I'm Chris and I'm from Birmingham. And I love this city.
Sounds like a rallying cry. Thank you, Chris. Panel, yes. Pete.
Can I go first, if only because I'm going to have to leave in 5 minutes, I'm afraid, so apologies for that. You asked me before if we could make one suggestion about what could be done. I've got 4.
Oh, go on then.
But they won't,
you're all 4 because you're going to have to leave. Yeah, go on.
So the first one builds on that last contribution that was made. However serious the problem and however difficult it is to tackle, there is always something that you can do, and there's something that all of you can do. And even if you're only alleviating the circumstances of a few people in a few places, it's still worth doing. Just because you can't solve the whole problem doesn't mean that any form of action isn't important. It is. And little examples like that, I think, are good examples of the way in which we can make a difference, even with the limited resources we have. So do take action to do what you can. The second thing I would say is that I think, as I said earlier, I think the council should be applauded for establishing a Child Poverty Commission, and in particular to establish it because they want to see and they want to promote a multi-agency response to the problems of child poverty in the city. So I encourage you to try and track the work of the Child Poverty Commission and engage with it and support the council in making this an issue and in helping to identify those things that can be done locally.
On that point, Pete, are they going to be open meetings? Because my guess
so.
Is, if we know about them, I think that would be fantastic to come along to help and support.
I presume so, but I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know. The third thing is, ultimately, however, it's national policies that will make a difference. And is there one national policy that I would promote to make a difference to child poverty? Ironically, because, as I say, it doesn't focus resources upon poor families. The promotion of child benefit as a universal benefit and maintaining the value of child benefit as a contribution to the costs of families with children, I think, is the most important anti-poverty measure because it affects all families with children and because it tackles the risk of poverty for families with children. And it binds us all into a commitment to children as the future generation and an investment in them. And therefore, I think if there is a single national policy measure that I would support, it's maintaining and expanding child benefit as a universal benefit. And my last point, although it may not make me popular with everybody in this room, is that at the end of the day, I think the most important decisions about child poverty and about what can be done about it are taken by national government. I think national governments matter most. There's a general election coming up. I don't think that this current national government has much of a commitment to solving the problem of child poverty, and I would like to see this government changed. I think there's only one way to get rid of this government, and that's to vote Labour in the next election, because there's no other party that has any prospect of getting power.
That's certainly a view. Well, that is a view. That's a view. There are many other views, and I'm sure we're going to hear some of those. But Pete, thank you very much. Can I just say in advance that Pete did say before he agreed to come today that he did have a prior engagement, so he will have to leave shortly. But Bharat, on to you. Either a comment to pick up on what's been said, and by the way, the screen is just we're putting up a Twitter wall. Hashtag is child poverty, so please do join in the debate there. Off you go, Bharat.
A couple of things. I'd like to share a Haida Indian saying. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our future generations. So for me, the issue is about social responsibility. What are we leaving? What is a legacy? And it's what we do now that matters. I think there are some practical things, and it's again about, I recognize the political agendas, the political issues, the campaigning that needs to be done to create the change. Practical measures, if our children mattered so much, going back to the theme of every child matters, there are practical things. Ensure every child is fed. Free school meals for all children, rich or poor. It goes to the activities at school. When there are activities and trips and so on, every child gets that free. And so I think there are practical measures that can be taken, that should be taken, and that should be campaigned for. How can a policy owned by government and all the political parties, such as Every Child Matters, be there? Because it's only rhetoric unless something is done. So I'm going to stop on that, because I think the key thing is about social responsibility and changing the campaign to say, well, actually, if poverty does matter to us, what are the things that are of concern? And it's about people being fed, warm, having a roof over their head, and it's those sort of things. Of course, it affects adults as well. But I think in terms of children, there are some practical measures that can be taken.
Okay. Thank you, Bharat. Pauline, quick comment from you and from Oliver, and then back to the floor, please. So, Pauline.
It's hard to know exactly which up on. I think it's great we hear that Birmingham's got a commission on child poverty, and I completely applaud that, because we have to go forward and be optimistic and aspirational. And today I went with one of the students who's here today to interview James Mackay, who's the Cabinet Member for Social Cohesion, Equality and Community Safety. There you go, James, I remembered. And he gave a very passionate interview, and it was entirely genuine and no holding back, agreeing with the fact that the cuts have disproportionately affected Birmingham, and that the council itself needs to shift its emphasis and put child poverty at the top of the agenda. If we don't put it at the top of the agenda, it's going to just keep on being where it is. So I'll leave my comments at that for the moment.
Okay, as you move it over, thank you very much to Pete Alcock. And let me tell you, Pete, if the Commission has open meetings, we'll be there. Yeah, fantastic. Okay. Thank you. Oliver. It's fine, it is there, yep. Oh, hello.
I'm going to be superstitious. Is it Friday the 13th and try the other one instead? All right, okay. I'll use the left-hand one instead. There we go. I'm going to miss the car park in the council, because twice a year when I go and do the Royal British Legion service, I get a car parking space at the bottom as the Lord Mayor arranges it, which is rather pleasant. But apart from that, yeah, I'm quite happy to see the back of it in a way. There is clergy a great plagiarist. I'm going to plagiarise a former Archbishop of Canterbury who talked about a scene in Futurama where the spaceship is about to crash. Anyone know about Futurama? It's a cartoon series, a little bit like The Simpsons, based in deep space. And the spaceship is about to crash. And everyone runs about going, what do we do? Who do we blame? And there's a lot of blame floating around the room, and some of it is very understandable. Some of it is about identity and about who we belong to. And those are kind of quite tricky things. The Archbishop of Canterbury the other week asked the church not to challenge politics on the basis of the badge they wear or the label they wear, but on the basis of actual policy, on the basis of kind of issues that affect people most. And I think for that reason, it's really good to hear from somebody who is actually a young person in Birmingham. I think you should be down here instead of me, really, to be honest, because I'm not a young person.
Give him time.
In terms of the Church of England, I'm a very young person, but in terms of the city, I'm not. And I know that we are living in a city that is getting younger, and in a city which is getting younger at heart as well as in spirit. I do wonder what's going to happen when that real kind of bulk, that new glut of young people in Birmingham, when they start to get to the age where they are able to have a voice and able to vote, and able to start having their say, what it is they're actually going to say, and when it's not just you, a solitary young man in a big room of older people, excuse me, rest of you, but when it's actually a whole bunch of you. Now, some people took the riots in 2011 to be an expression of that voice, which is a voice expressed not in terms of reasoned debate or even in angry debate, but a voice expressed in kind of violence and some very terrifying images. Other people say it's just being hushed up and that it's not important. And that's profoundly concerning because that voice does need to be heard and it needs to be identified at the heart of life. The last thing I want to say is that I think a lot of the manifestos that political parties are putting out at the moment are profound. I said I wasn't going to be political, and I have been. I think a lot of the manifestos are profoundly concerning. I think it's also profoundly concerning that some parties are polling at 19%, and that some other parties who claim to have the mood and the spirit of the British people are polling at 6%. Why is it that 20% of the population are willing to vote for policies that will negatively impact quite a lot of the people who are their neighbours? And this is why I start to say I don't want to do politics, because much of the time it's not the politicians I've got to try and convince, it's actually the general public, and a public at large who sees my voice talking about child poverty, and probably if I had a room full of less reasonable people than you, they'd start to say, well, what about your church? That you abuse kids, don't you? You didn't stand up for children when it mattered. What about the NHS? That didn't stand up for children when it mattered. What about local government? What about community generally? How authentic is the voice that says this is not in the interests of people in Britain? Well, all of us have a badge. All of us have an allegiance. All of us belong to something. A lot of the time we've got to try and transcend that and say, well, it doesn't matter what I belong to. It doesn't matter what my allegiance is. I'm trying to appeal to a humanitarian value and basis there. So I want to say something better than just let's kind of change the minds and hearts of those who are in politics. They wouldn't hold those policies were it not for the fact that the pollsters said they were popular, or were it not for the fact that they saw them themselves go up a couple of points in the polls when they put them out there. What's much more concerning is a hatred and an envy at the heart of British society, which says that some people are getting what I'm not getting, and therefore I'm going to make it so that government penalises them for it. That's at the root of sanctions. That's at the root of some very negative attitudes to migrants and to ethnic minorities and to people who are gay, people who are coming from a wide variety of protected characteristics. That's at the heart of it. Why do people want to vote UKIP? Not that UKIP exists. They exist because people want it. Why? Why do they want that?
Thank you, Oliver. Right, can I just say, we've got a number of people. I've got this gentleman here coming down to the front then. We've got two people at the front here. And the middle group, it would be lovely to hear from you, particularly some of whom I know work in this field. Lovely if you could share some of your experience with us. But we'll start with this gentleman. Tell us who you are.
Jeff Bateson. My role 2009 to 2011 was to bring together people from a range of agencies across Birmingham who would, I suppose now we call them the child poverty champions for their agency. Then they were just the people who felt they could make a difference in their own agency. That being Job Centre Plus, the voluntary sector, housing, and various directorates of the City Council, into a set of productive conversations about what's in your plan now and are you going to do it? And is that going to be impacting positively or negatively on child poverty? We identified about 30 things that were in people's plans or could be in people's plans. 25 of them people were already working on, and they had a named person pushing them along. And yes, there was loads of good stuff being done in Birmingham over the last 10 years. We doubled the skills levels in Birmingham. We say there's a skills gap. We need to keep reminding ourselves that behind that skills gap, there was an even bigger skills gap 10 years ago. Yes, we got the 80,000 almost people, children in poverty was 100,000 in 2007. The figures in Neatschul's were 60-something thousand. They're now 40-something thousand. There were several wards over 50% of children in poverty. Then there were no wards with children with over 50% of children. So there was significant progress by pushing those along. And I think it was because there was a relentless conversation about child poverty is an industrial scale problem, and it needs to be, we need to find the industrial scale solutions and the pace. So one of my jobs was to keep relentlessly badgering these people to do what was in their plans. And that was the way we made progress. I think in 2012, the landscape slipped very significantly from my perspective. Because of the pressures on the City Council, some of those people then ended up not doing those jobs. Some of those people ended up not writing those plans. Those plans sort of got watered down or shelved a little bit because of the pressures. Some volunteer organisations were then worrying about other things, not pressing ahead. So that was one dimension to it. The other dimension that's been mentioned is the very significant change that came through and hit Birmingham suddenly around some of the changes in welfare. And I think the sanctioning issue is the major cause of, and there isn't child poverty in Birmingham, there's parent poverty in Birmingham. You know, the children don't have poverty, they experience poverty. It's the low wage and the lack of benefits. And the lack of benefits is the gap when suddenly your benefit gets cut for some sometimes quite spurious reasons, it feels like. The reasons, the several that we didn't manage to crack, and some of them have been mentioned now. One, because there was nobody at the table who really had the power to push it along. We had somebody from the Chamber of Commerce there, but that was a loose network of employers. There was nobody there who was writing the employer plan with any real mandate. And we got the LEP now. That is, you know, the answer, but it's not the answer, if you know what I mean. If we want to solve this at the industrial scale, there's got to be an industrial level production of jobs that are low skill, medium wage. All over the city, where they're needed, all over the city. And without that, we will not get, you know, people in employment with wage. We'll get people relying on the transience of government policy around welfare.
And are those jobs coming?
No, what the plans were, there was Birmingham wants to be a high-skill, high-wage economy. So medical technicians, the sort of people that BCU might train in the future, you know, fine. You know, we need those. But there's this big hole where the people who are not employed, who want to be employed, are chasing non-existent jobs and being sanctioned for not getting them. You know, there's a cycle there that's immoral or something. The other one that we didn't manage to crack was the public image of poverty and the buy-in from the media. When we tried to have conversations with the media, that what they wanted is, what's the story? So every time the Child Poverty Action Group figures came out, there was a whole load of coverage on child poverty because it was how bad it is and how bad Ladywood is. Ladywood's not that bad, actually. The percentage is high, but it's a very small number of children. There are other worse parts of the city because they've got lower levels but much larger number of children. So the figures sometimes become a bit strange. So I think something about a campaign with the media around children and poverty and parents and poverty, but whether you'd actually get them to report on employers are not producing jobs, I don't know. They don't feel that's their role, I don't think.
Speaking as a journalist, we are interested in stories like that. We're interested in people's stories.
So the story that's not relentlessly pushed forward is, where are the jobs that people are being blamed for not getting? Now, I don't see that every time I open the evening mail. I see other stories every time I open the evening mail. So the public perception is something there.
I'm going to ask you to bring it to Oxford.
I think that's all really.
Okay.
The figures, I think we used to track relentlessly the figures on relative poverty. I think because of the change, we'll be less able to know where Birmingham is in terms of figures.
Jeff, thank you very much. No, that's all right. Down here, so please do tell us who you are, then two in the front. And then if we got any other people who are sitting waiting, so 1, 2, these ladies here who are hovering around wanting to say something lovely. Yep, super. No pressure, obviously. Okay, yes, please.
Hello, I'm Councillor John Clancy. I'm a humble backbencher, and I'm a councillor for Quinton. And a couple of years ago, for various reasons, I was preparing a sort of an alternative view for the future of the city. And one of the things that I was proposing was, and I think is important for the debate tonight, was in relation to becoming a free school meal city. I think that is something we should be aiming for, a completely free school meal city, infant, junior, secondary, whether it's a free school, whether it's an academy, whether it's a local authority school. I think it would have the biggest impact in terms of child poverty in this city and across the city. And just coming back to one of the points that was made earlier, there are pockets of poverty throughout the city. It's not just about the big wards with the big poverty issues that we know about. When I was doing that research, one of the proposals I was making initially was that every school which had 35% or more of their kids on free school meals, we should start with those 130, 140 schools in the city, in primary schools, and we should have free school meals in those places to begin with. And when you looked at where the schools were, with 35% plus, they were everywhere. There are schools in Sutton Vesey, in Sutton Trinity, in Hall Green. Across the city, there are pockets of poverty, often around schools, those particular schools. And I think I worked out at the time how much it would cost. It was going to be about £20 million. And the position I took when people said, where are you going to get the money from, was, well, actually, on a zero-based approach, that should be the first thing that goes into the budget. What is our first priority in the city? And that is actually one of the things is, in terms of fighting child poverty, is free school meals. I still think this city should be looking towards setting up a free school meals trust that is looking towards free school meals across the city. And I think that there is great wealth in this city, next door to extreme poverty. Everywhere you go around this city. We've got next door to Ladywood, we have the Calthorpe Estate, which is owned effectively by one man, and it's probably worth about £2.2 billion. Next door, we have a situation where most council tax, the majority of council tax collected in this city is actually from the two lowest council tax bands.
Okay, John. Well, let me put you on the point. Let me say to you here then, because Kerslake says this has been going on for a long time. This isn't about one or several administrations. It's been going on for a long time. Why hasn't that been done? I mean, when you mentioned it, there was a big ripple. If I've read the room right, people think, yeah, that would be a great idea. Why hasn't it happened?
I've had it.
The Labour Party planning education finance cuts. They're planning to cut the education budget nationally. How can you have this big increase in expenditure? Welcome as it is.
Well, let's just hear.
Yeah. There's all sorts of reasons over the past 20 years that free school meals has not been seen as the answer. I think the Child Poverty Action Group in particular over the last 10 years has been promoting that as a policy. I think here's the rub. I think that people saw spending on education as the way that you improved education. In fact, as far as I'm concerned, it's spending on housing, it's spending on health, and it's spending on, for example, free school meals. That actually is education spending. And one of the issues that we when Kerslake first came and presented his report, one of the things I said to him directly that morning was that if we did everything in this report, it wouldn't be a tenth of what is required in terms of radical change in the city. And the real issue that is not addressed, which I think is also at the root of child poverty in this city, that does not even get a mention in Kerslake, is housing. And poor quality housing in this city, and the failure to build affordable housing in this city over the past 20 years, I think, has the biggest impact in terms of child poverty. And I think that unless we start to commit to actively build thousands of houses a year, not hundreds, over the next 10 years, never mind up until 2031, then the child poverty in this city will get worse. If you're spending a lot of families in the city are spending well over 30% of their income on food, fuel, and housing, and that's at the heart of child poverty. We have a situation, for example, where...
John, I'm going to just take you back for a second.
Yep.
You didn't quite answer me. Why didn't we get free school meals across the city if that is actually seen as something that's so very positive and might get to the heart of some of the issues?
I think it was seen as a particularly... I think it was...
Okay, let's get this,
Yep.
and then I'll come round to you again because I've got a few people waiting, but I just want you to answer that if you would.
I think it was seen as a very expensive thing to do, and it took perhaps, admittedly, this government did introduce the free school meals for infant schools, and it was an extremely expensive thing. I think it was perceived as expensive, but actually, just coming back to the point, one of the things that I think an incoming Labour government would be doing would be to allow further capital spending in a way that the Conservatives are not. The capital spending, borrowing for capital spending and investing in housing in particular. But just one thing to finish though, we've got a local government pension fund in the West Midlands, and it's council workers' pension money, and it pays out on average about £4,800 a year, and £2,800 average for women. And its assets or investment are £11 billion. Most of that is invested outside the city, outside the region. I think we need to start, in terms of where the money comes from, I think we need to start rewiring that kind of investment into housing in Birmingham. It's happening in Greater Manchester now, where the City Council is providing the land and the pension fund is investing in housing. If we don't get the issue of housing right in this city over the next 10 years, the child poverty issue in the city will get worse.
Right, thank you very much. Can I get you to hand the mic to Anthea? We've got two people at the front here, and there's a lady at the back who put her hand up. She's over there. So if you could take it round, Anthea. So, yeah, over here. Tell us who you are.
My name is Pauline Roach, and I work in the voluntary sector in Birmingham. I live in Bostle Heath. I was delighted, Diane, to see in the video at the beginning the coverage of the Real Junk Food project. I think that's a brilliant project that has come to Birmingham, and I'd like to see that supported. At the last debate that you chaired, I spoke about the new chief executive, who's still new, of Birmingham City Council, Mark Rogers. I think he really cares about Birmingham, and I think we really need to support him, and I want to say that again. I think Birmingham City Council is under attack from central government, and they don't need us to attack them as well. I think we want to get behind the council, and we can disagree with them, but not attack them, because they're already vulnerable from the central government, and I don't want to see them be any more vulnerable. I'm delighted. I'd also like to point out, as people here will know, there are other people in the city who care. My Muslim neighbours, my Sikh neighbours in the Gurdwaras, Christians are all doing their bit to support people in the city and children, and that's great. I'm delighted that your next debate is about leadership. I think that's there is a gap of leadership. I'm interested to see who our leaders are. I'm not sure that's very clear in Birmingham always, and I wouldn't say that the people who are put up as leaders are always the leaders that I would want to follow. Luke up there, I'd be quite happy to have him as kind of one of our leaders, because he cares and he's putting himself out there. You know, at 17, that's a remarkable achievement, and I'd like to support him and people like him. Okay, thank you.
Pauline. While you hand the mic over, let me tell you that actually Mark Rogers, I think, is on the panel at the University of Birmingham discussion about leadership. So that
could I just interrupt on the point of Mark Rogers to say Mark sent me a message tonight to say he's really sorry he couldn't join us and that he absolutely endorses this debate and he's really happy it's taking place. So I'd like to convey that to everybody, and also James Mackay, the same sort of comments. Yeah.
Thank you, Pauline. Okay, tell us who you are.
My name is Ted Ryan. I worked for the City Council for 25 years within education and regeneration and community education. I now work within the voluntary sector. I wanted to come back to the Commission, and one of my fears is that it'll be a sort of one-size-fits-all across the city, and I think picking up things that other people have said, that that doesn't work in Birmingham. And an example of that is I went out to West Northfield, which is the Longbridge, Berkeley Green, Wheelie Castle area, and I was out there in the mid-90s. And that area wasn't getting a great deal of money. At that point, we started doing some research, and the amount of money per head of the population spent on the voluntary sector within inner city wards was £8, and the outer ring wards it was 34 pence. Right? Once the other bits of research then started looking at areas of poverty, areas of poverty that are out there, and you got some of the schools out there where where the free school meals were hitting between 50 and 60%. That is masked by other schools. If you think of Kings Norton, the New Deal estate, one of the poorest areas of the city, on the other side of the Redditch Road, however, you've got 250, 300,000 pound houses. It starts masking it. We have to ensure that we begin to look at those areas, and we begin to look at that. I also think there's a correlation between those areas sometimes and some of the old jobs that were in Birmingham. And that leads on to one of the other things that we've got in this city, which is poverty of aspiration, because that is one of the biggest problems. The schools have been turned around, the schools are succeeding, but the children who come from the better households are still achieving better than those that come from the poorer households. And part of that is sometimes because once they've got the good GCSEs or whatever, where do you go next? What do you aspire to? And how do you support people in doing that? And that sort of comes into sort of like, supporting, the colleague they're doing, supporting family learning, supporting parents and understanding where you go and everything like that. And it has to be that because, one of the gurus of family learning, community education in the 80s, John Bastiani, children only spend 15% of their time at school. They spend 85% of their time at home. And everybody used to go, oh yeah, but most of that's sleeping. Well, it's not. You break it down in hours. The school contract is still roughly 1,260 hours a year. There's 8,000 hours in a year. Do the sums. And that's where the incentive, that's where the support needs to go. Because one of the issues we've got, once the schools are doing it, a lot of the kids who come from those families, if you start at reception at naught, if you put a baseline there and put that at naught, and the average child comes in at naught and then it progresses through to everything else and everything like that. A lot of those children who got no aspiration in the family, who got very little support, they are coming in minus figures. And it's a variety of minus figures as well. And they are on that catch-up all the time. And I think if we're going to do that, then the Commission has to look at all those issues, but not just on a big city issue and not just on where the big sums are. Because as Jeff has pointed out, in some areas they may be big sums, but they may be small numbers.
Thank you for that. While you put the mic, could I get you to push the mic back, this lady here? We'll hear from a lady who's got the microphone back there. Can I just say that we will keep an eye on the Commission, because clearly when the Commission has its first open meeting, that will be fantastic to go and perhaps do some live broadcast from it, because the more people get to hear of what's being done as part of democracy, isn't it? And I think that's the importance of these sorts of events. So lady up there, please tell us who you are.
Yeah, my name is Alga.
Olga Goredima Braid, and I work with health visitors in Nichols, Newtown, and Aston. I just really wanted to make a contribution that focused more on the solutions, as Pete suggested before he left, because it is very, very difficult when you're working day in and day out with children, and it is quite painful sometimes to experience with them what it's really like behind the statistics you are seeing and hearing about. So in looking at those solutions, it's really being heartened by some of the suggestions that are being made about what action can we actually take. A few ideas that come to mind pick up on some of the things that others have said. The idea of giving these people a voice and giving the families and children the opportunity to tell their stories, not necessarily in a journalistic way, as I interpret journalism, but in a storytelling way that gives them power to actually tell their stories rather than somebody else telling their stories for them. The chairwoman of the board suggested what can we do in the community as community-based work. I think that's really a good suggestion. One thing is that health visitors in the city are increasing. And one area we can really begin to work with others on is that community-based, because we're so intimately involved with families day in and day out. I could tell you stories now about people with no recourse to public funds in this city. And when some of my colleagues have got to drive some of the parents and the children to leave them outside the door of social services because they've got no home to go to tonight. And that's how difficult it can get sometimes, and that's the reality of what's happening in our city. Councillor Clancy, I really welcome your idea about free school. Again, something that will make a difference. I'm sorry, I keep losing the voice.
We can hear you, it's fine.
Here. The issue of housing, when you go into some of the accommodation that these families are in, it's disgusting, and it really does, break your heart. And how can you walk out at the end of the day and go to my home in Sutton Goldfield, leaving these families behind? It really is difficult, and that's the reality of what we're working with day in and day out.
Thank you very much for that contribution. I'm just reminded of that great saying that if you're not angry, you haven't been paying attention. The moment you read and you look at some of the details of this and listen to yourself talking about this, I think we use the word scandalous that's been used from the floor here. This lady here, tell me who you are.
Yeah, I'm Lynn Evans, and it's a point leading on from that, really, and some of the things that Jeff
Lynn,
said
I'm
earlier.
going to get you to put the mic lovely.
Basically, it's just we've talked about the growth of homelessness, benefit sanctions, the growth of food banks, but does that mirror a decline, really? It's not only welfare reform, but a decline in funding for the independent rights-based welfare rights sector, so housing rights, etc., etc. So if that's being cut in the midst of all of the welfare reform, really, it's got to add to it. So in terms of community-based services, just looking at that.
Thank you very much. What I'm going to do is come back to the panel, and then we'll do one final round. There are people who've spoken already who want to speak again. So and we'll start with you who hasn't spoken yet. But let's come back to the panel and another lady there. Oh, it's always that last minute surge, isn't it? So I will put forward the people who haven't spoken yet at all, because that's the nature of these things. And then I'll try and get round everybody who's wanting to speak for a second time. But panel, a reflection on that, please, keeping it fairly brief if you would.
I'm going to touch on the free meals cost of 20 million. That's £20 per person in Birmingham, less than that. Of course, children won't pay. So if you look at adults, you're talking about £80 per person. That's not a lot for a year for school meals for every child in the city. And so, you know, it is about looking at practical campaigns. If the government, and hence the city, has a commitment for Every Child Matters, then food is a basic need, and a basic human need. And £20 million for a city the size of Birmingham, if those are the figures, it's achievable through campaigning, but certainly from government responsibility. I'm going to stop on that.
Thank you. Move it round to Pauline.
Hello. Yes, I've heard that idea promoted before, and I think it is fantastic. Is this working?
It is.
Yes, it's working.
The way you hold it.
No professionalism. It is about practical solutions. But first of all, we had to get the topic out here, and then people will have ideas. There's a wealth of experience in this room from all sorts of sectors, whether it's personal, professional, legal, as a councillor, elected representative. And I would just like to say, much as I do poke at the council, there are some very decent people who work really hard as well as have jobs and do care. So I'm sure solutions are fully possible.
Oliver.
I think UIFSM, the University Infant Free School Meals, was a wonderful thing, and I think actually broadening it in the way you're talking about is great as well. I think just a bit of thought about the capital costs and how that's going to affect some primary schools. The primary school I was working with at the time that UIFSM came in were panicked because they had no idea how they were going to do it. They were going to start feeding lunch to their kids at 11 o'clock in the morning, and hopefully they were going to finish by the end of the school day. That was the way it looked at one point. So just something about how these things are going to happen. We can't just click our fingers and feed the world. We need to actually make sure that it functions and we've got the infrastructure to get the stuff there. So the Real Junk Food Project has been mentioned a couple of times now, and I really want to mention it myself because they run out the back of my church. And they are fantastic. They have come to Birmingham with a relatively good amount of local knowledge, and they have not done what people have presumed to do in the past in the third sector and kind of turn up, patronise people and say, here we are, we're going to make lots of lovely food for you, you sit down there and do it. But have actually engaged with their service users, their customers they call them, and have turned their customers into volunteers and service providers. That border between service user and service provider is lovely and fuzzy within that group of people. And they are such a good example because they are not only servicing that basic need of having a nutritious and healthy meal, but they are actually helping people to acquire skills and to develop something that we hope is going to be seriously useful to them in the future. So I just want to go the final tiny thing. Sanctioning is a massive Sanctioning is a massive issue. It really is. Sometimes the revenue just cocks up. And I've had people stood on my doorstep who can't go anywhere else because they haven't got a letter. But they said, oh, the revenue won't pay me. They said they're sorry and they're going to do it next week. That's really unacceptable. Sanctioning is one thing. I think messing up when 40 quid a week or whatever is all you have to spend food on is just not good enough. And I think just solving some of those administrative details kind of takes out, again, another little layer. Sanctioning is a problem, yeah, but...
Thank you. Right, okay, this lady here, tell me who you are.
Thank you. I'm Councillor Anita Ward. I'm a councillor for Hodge Hill and I'm the chair of the Education and Vulnerable Children Scrutiny Committee. I just want to address a couple of myths around here tonight. Luke, I couldn't care less about the councillor's car park. I think we've got bigger things to worry about than a councillor's car park, to be quite honest with you. There's also this thing that's going around this room tonight that Birmingham City councillors don't care about what's going on in this city. Not true. I got into politics because I was a single parent mom, 2 children living on one of the worst council estates in this city, and that was Castle Vale. That's come on in leaps and bounds, and I think that shows what can be done. What turned Castle Vale around? Government money. What doesn't Birmingham have at the moment? Government money. And, I take on board some of the issues that have been raised here tonight about the budget. If you had £10 yesterday and you've got a £5 today, you're going to have to make difficult choices. And we sat in the council chamber just over a week ago and voted for the worst budget this city has ever had to vote for. And if you think that was an easy choice, I'm sorry, you're all wrong. And the other thing that nobody has addressed here tonight is some of the tremendous work that our council workers are doing, despite those cuts that we've had to implement. We've got some good work going on in this city. Yeah, I don't know how many of you have been watching Midlands Today this week, highlighting one of the estates in my ward, which has got some of the highest poverty in the city, and that's Bromford. There are people down on that estate that have decided enough is enough, and they've brought themselves together and they've started addressing some of the issues around child poverty. We're supporting them, but we're not running that. That is the community itself that is doing it. So if one thing out of tonight is knock us as politicians as much as you want, don't knock the workers in this city that are continuing to work despite the difficult circumstances they're in. Thank you.
Thank you. Take the mic up. I've got to say, I think there's actually quite a lot of support for people doing things. I mean, I've certainly heard lots of people saying, you know, what's great is that people do care, and there is quite a lot going on. But let's hear from this lady here in the sort of circular-y jumper there. Oh, yes, it's a terrible description. And then there was a gentleman at the very back, lady down here. So I'm very keen that we hear from people we haven't heard, and then I'll see who we need to hear from again.
Caroline Wallater from Eshram Moseley Housing Association. And I want to speak about food and school holidays. Foods and free school meals has come up a lot, and food is absolutely a frontline issue. You know, we're a food bank referral agency. We're supporting a range of initiatives around that. And in the work that we do, a lot of people put a lot of store in free school meals and absolutely would applaud getting universal free school meals in Birmingham. But something that a lot of people don't realise is that for 170 days a year, we don't have no children have access to free school meals, and that's 47% of the year. School holidays are 25% of the year, and we know that families go into crisis during school holidays, whether it's debt, whether it's food poverty, arrears, safeguarding, it all spikes. And this is not new, but school holidays receive very little attention from a policy level. I've spoken to Nick Clegg about it, actually, and there's an agreement that as a country we have not looked sufficiently at the risks around, say, school holidays, and there is a lot more that we could do in small incremental measures. It is, you know, things are getting worse because of cuts. We recognise that, you know, youth services, children's centres, places that people could go during that time, you know, are much less available, and we are looking for community solutions. We ran a program called Holiday Kitchen around learning food and play during school holidays, and are looking, you know, working with corporates to get sponsorship, community activists, but there's a lot more work around that area that is needed from a policy level right down to grassroots level. So just, you know, in the commission, I hope school holidays can be considered.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Ilka, could you pass it back? There's a lady at the end there, and then a gentleman sort of behind her on the back row. And then, is there anybody else who hasn't spoken who wants to speak? Please indicate, because I'd like to take them before we do some final. Oh yes, right. We'll be coming back down to you. So this lady here.
My name's Caroline, and I work with health visiting with Alcock. And I just want to tell you just a very quick story. I took a phone call a few weeks ago from a hospital where there was a very critically ill baby. The staff on the ward
Keep going.
were not able to contact the parent and asked if we could do a home visit. We managed to go to the house and found 4 families of migrant workers there. The baby was about 4 weeks old, and the parents hadn't seen the baby since it was 2 days old. and they had no credit on the phone. They were in very substandard housing. They had hardly any food. They were dependent on food parcels. The father of the child, he had a job when he came over. He was supporting his family, and then he got taken ill and was advised by his GP that he couldn't work. And like Algar, these are just some of the human stories that we pick up day in, day out. And I think sort of Oliver Coss said at the very start of the debate about the humanity, and I think there's not a lot of it about in policy making.
Thank you very much. Back to the gentleman on the back row, please. And then, yeah.
Hi, I'm Eddie O'Hara. I'm a social worker here in Birmingham. I've been a social worker for about 30-odd years, and I'd certainly I suppose there's loads of things I would love to be able to say, and I think reflecting the point over there about there is fantastic work happening here in social care, in health and everything else, but just a small example perhaps of just the savage implications of the cuts that have happened. In August 2012, we had 64 family centres. September 2012, we had 16. You know, the impact of the cuts and the impact on the services are just absolutely phenomenal. They're centrally imposed, and the council here, unfortunately, have to pick up the tab. Sorry, these kind of couple of sentences are going to take about 5 hours, so I'll sort of hurry up. But I think some of the broader things perhaps is it's a very complicated thing about what is poverty and how we're going to change things. But one of the things I would throw in is this evening there are millions of people sitting at home watching Comic Relief, actually putting their hands in their pockets and they're phoning up and they are donating. Now, whatever we think about charity and about whatever we think of the role it is in supporting services, the very same people perhaps at home, and it's not a criticism of them, have this kind of contradiction about charity is important, where it touches upon them the importance of people that haven't got services, but at the same time thinking rich is okay, celebrity is okay, because we hear this thing that actually it's okay to be really, really rich. And the impacts of that are profound. It's a bit like there are contradictions everywhere, and it's no reflection upon religions, etc., or governments, but religions are very, very powerful, very, very rich things, working with very poor people. And I think until in society we're able to connect for people themselves to want to actually end poverty and that sort of contradiction inside, it's really hard, because the systems that we live in is a capitalist system. And whether we like it or not, it promotes the accumulation of wealth and power, etc. And until those very fundamental issues are addressed for people across the country, and we make it easier for them to be kind and to be caring and to be compassionate, and we have the systems that facilitate that, lots of the other stuff that we do, and it's fantastic. And in this city, and it's a great city, there are thousands of brilliant activities and agencies and partnerships out there that are doing great work. But on their own, going back to our friend earlier, without a national strategy to overcome poverty, without people wanting to take on what they would see as the kind of the unpalatable part of politics, poverty is going to carry on. And it's a tragedy, because I really genuinely think most people want to help. Most people want to be kind. Most people want to care. Most of us have the same interest of fine housing, fine education, fine health. But this system actually prevents that from happening, and we need to sit down and have an adult conversation and come up with some kind of a clear plan to take it forward. I'm sorry if that was a bit sort of rambled, but there are lots of other things I would like to say. Brush on.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Down here.
My name's David, Minister. There's lots of things that could be said this evening. Lots of wonderful things have been said. One of the Twitter feeds said, "Where is Sir Albert Bohr?" Sentences like that are sexy, I suppose. Sir Albert Bohr cannot be everywhere. Our councillors are already doing some wonderful work. I was at the first Kerslake debate the other week, and I think there were 13 councillors there. So they're taking time as well, and many of them are working voluntarily and doing the best they can. Councillors and people like Sir Albert Bohr run surgeries. If you want to speak to the councillors, go to one of those surgeries. On behalf of our Methodist Church people and Citizens UK Birmingham, I've actually gone to those surgeries with Sir Albert Bohr and other people, and you'll get half an hour of one-to-one dialogue and conversation at a real level. So make use of those surgeries, otherwise they'll stop doing the surgeries. The word practical has come up once or twice this evening, and what can we do of a practical nature? People like myself and Oliver and other people of faith can pray. People forget that. But the big thing that we have as church people is spaces. In the Birmingham area, the Methodist Church circuit has 40 churches scattered around Birmingham. Often, they're closed. We'd love them to be open. If anybody has any ideas of being able to start food kitchens or learning sessions for young people or for young parents or for single-parent families, whatever it might be, speak to those faith communities. It doesn't have to be a Christian faith. It can be any faith. In Citizens UK, I work with Hindus, Muslims, Jewish people, people of no faith, all diversity, rich diversity, and we get on famously, like there is generally a good feeling here tonight. Those spaces in churches and faith places find it difficult to open, but if you go and knock on the door, they'll open and they'll help. There's a massive amount of voluntary work happening in the city already, and let's commend it and let's try and knock on doors. And doors, when you knock on them, normally open, especially if there's 2 or 3 of you. And we can do these things together.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. This lady here? Yep.
Hello, I'm Carrie Bath. I want to speak up in part on the benefit sanctions, but also to remind people that it goes well before that. In fact, getting onto benefits can take people an awful long time. When I did work in social work for a long time, and it always used to be that if someone came in and they didn't have money, we could ring up the old DHSS, as it used to be, and we could make a payment on behalf of DHSS and get it repaid. And so it didn't actually come out of the local authority funds. Now it can take an awful long time for people just to get into benefits, because they've got to, in order to sign on, they've got to have a permanent address, and it's a cycle for people. And there was a reference to people with no recourse to public funds. The government immigration policy, they have a policy of depriving a lot of people who come to this country of government funds. You know, there's talk about, I think they're talking about 9 months living in this country before people are entitled to it. I don't know why they talk about it, because that's actually been an informal policy for a very, very long time, that people have to be habitually resident. And local authorities, Birmingham being one of them, spends a lot of money on supporting people who, in one way or another, because of their immigration status or because of the benefit system, are not entitled to money. Now, the other thing that the people more probably that are going into the benefit system, their other route is food banks. Now, I understand, I haven't actually practiced in social work for a bit. My understanding is that one of the significant routes to food banks is a reference by a government agency, that the job centre will refer people. Now, when we're talking here about free school meals, I think that's great. But actually, I think what we also need to do is to give families the capacity to bring up their children in a reasonable way. And I think one of those things is dignity. And I think it's Victorian. It's the Victorian poorhouse to say to people, go to food banks. I think it's a terrible way to treat people. And I think what we need, a system that gives families sufficient money, and that does come back to benefits, and also the government immigration policy, sufficient money to give their children a reasonable standard of living, which I think every family actually wants to do for their child, and it gives them dignity. And not giving them that is another type of poverty. It's the poverty of their dignity. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Right. Ladies and gentlemen, we're coming into the final sort of 15 minutes of the time that we've got here. What I'm proposing to do is to ask our three panel members who are here if they had one thing that they could suggest that would actually help in some way. There's no, there's no panacea for it, but if there was one thing they could suggest, I'd like to hear what that is, and then let's take anybody who wants to make a final comment. And so people who've spoken before and have got their hands up yet, we'll come back to you. But let's just have some final comments, and then we'll call it to a halt. Does that lady in red, did you put your hand up just then, just so I can see? No, okay, fine. So, Bharat, one thing that would just actually have an impact on child poverty in this city.
I have in the past been involved with doing food runs and collecting food parcels in conjunction with church and local authority social services. But I think one of the things I can practically do at the university, perhaps Mel and I can touch base. I think it's about exploring the opportunity that the brother over there made about accessing faith premises to undertake some of that practical work. But it's raising awareness of poverty. And there are a lot of people who want to help. And one of the mottos we've used is hands that help are holier than lips that pray. And it was that motto which used to bring people together. They say, we don't want recognition, we don't want press or whatever. We just want to do our tuppence worth. Absolutely. And so I think I'm going to go and reflect and see how practically we have 300 social work students, we have loads of nursing students and others and so on, and I'm sure we can inspire those to make a small contribution. So I'm going to be left with that challenge and thought.
Right. When we hear back from you, I will retweet it and we'll make sure that we hear what it is. That's fantastic, Bharat. Pauline, one thing.
Daunting question. Yeah. I suppose really without a roof over your head, you can't really survive, can you? I'll give you a little story today. Something that happened last night. I was on my way out to meet a friend of mine for a nice meal, and a young man walked up to me outside of Tesco's in New Street, where there's often homeless people congregating, and some of them clearly have got drug and alcohol issues and have been on that street for a while. But he looked fresh-faced and terrified, and he walked up to me and he went, and I put my hand on his shoulder. I said, "What's happened?" And he said, "My dad died. He'd been brought up by his father, who's from divorced parents." I took the time, as you rightly say, to do something, not walk past, but to listen. His father had died, so he then moved from Leicester to Birmingham, lived with his aunt. She died just before Christmas. He wasn't allowed to stay in the council tenancy because it was 2-bed. He went to a hostel and he got into a little bit of debt, £70 worth of debt, and he was evicted by the police. And he's been living on the streets of Birmingham for 3 months. And I said, "Who's helping you?" And he said, "No one." So he stands and begs for £15 a night to stay in the night shelter. And he obviously is terrified. He said, So I had a very brief chat. I said, "Give me your number," because he had this little mobile phone. I said, "You better hide that, you might lose it." And I texted him from the restaurant. Really enjoyed that. I felt very good that I did keep my word. And then I met him today in New Street. I took him for a breakfast. We sat down and I made about 10 phone calls to get him a referral. But because he hasn't got any ID, we haven't quite got there, but we have got him a place at the Salvation Army for a referral on Monday, and then he can go to St. Basil's youth line. They're going to see him. But the point is, it takes money. He said to me, who would take the time? I'm not bigging myself up, we can all do these things, but who takes the time? And he said I could probably do it myself if I had money, I had credit on my phone, somewhere to sleep where I'm safe. So people, their resources are diminished by their situation, so we can all keep an eye out. That's not my solution to child poverty in the city. He was basically a young adult, but they're still children. So children in poverty, in families in poverty, growing to adults in poverty. It's about us not perpetuating that cycle. And I think it is a tough task to break it.
But I think we are in worse times than we ever were, and we have to think, because it's going to get even worse if we don't.
Thank you. Oliver, one thing, please. One positive, practical thing. One.
I've never just used one point in my life.
I'm learning that.
I think if I were to use one thing, and I'm kind of expanding on my Methodist colleague here who took the words right out of my head earlier, it's to help people who want to really harness their enthusiasm and give them the skills to actually do when it comes to tackling poverty and tackling those complex needs. I think there is within all of us an interior compassion that reaches out in that wonderful way that Pauline's just described. And I think that there is a compassion that reaches out and wants to actually make a sustained, wonderful difference to the world, that we can look at ourselves in the mirror the day after and say, I did that, I made someone's life better, or I've made a life better, or I've improved whatever. I think a lot of the time we don't know how to do it, and we don't know how to do it well. And Christians are very good at thinking kind of compassion. We kind of do what seems to us to be very good, but in fact isn't very good at all. And just providing that resource for training, for getting people acclimatized to the need they're trying to serve, and giving them some excellent tip-top advice on how they can do that. I think that could be so valuable, and trying meeting people who have that enthusiasm and helping them carry it out in the way that is most effective and going to be most useful for the people who receive it.
That was one point. Thank you very much, Oliver. Right, I'm coming back to the audience. Final tour round. So remind us who you are and tell us your point briefly so I can get round as many.
It's Luke. I just want to say something about the cuts. What I don't understand is, with this country, politicians are blaming the cuts on immigrants, Romanians, nurses and things like that, and they're cutting youth services and things like that for young people. And it's ridiculous, because we're in this mess because of greedy bankers and lying politicians, not because of hard-working people, not because of misjudged young people. So I think that's a point that I really want to get across. And if Birmingham really has to make hard cuts, then maybe Albert Bohr should cut his chauffeur-driven car costing £9,000 a year and get a free bike that the council are giving out to people.
Okay, thank you very much. That's a good view. Let's have next to you and then up here. So get the microphone up there. Oh, will you hit? Okay, there and then up there. Last view.
I just want to say that poverty is extremely damaging. My father was absolutely ruined by poverty. So was my mother-in-law. And they made so many other people's lives so bloody miserable because they were so damaged. I would say that 40% of food is wasted. 40% of food. So if you look into this on the internet, you'll find that out. Places of Welcome is active in Birmingham, and I would absolutely say to people, investigate Places of Welcome, because they are places where people with mental health difficulties, learning difficulties, homelessness are turning up, often in church halls and other places. Please, please, please look into Places of Welcome, establish some more. They are a very cost-effective, easy way. Community shop is coming, hopefully, active parks. There are things, good things happening that people can do where they can connect and be helped.
Thank you very much. Bring the microphone down here, and we'll have this gentleman here again. Did you want to? Yeah. Microphone down here again, here, and then up there.
Is it me now? Oh,
yeah,
right.
It is. It's your moment,
yeah, I think it's really difficult for us to come to terms with this discussion because people want to do something, and your emphasis on think of one practical thing, and sometimes people think in terms of charitable things like food banks and so on, and other people suggest things that will improve the professional support that we give through social services and so forth, and a feeling that at least we do something. But the reality is that although those things are absolutely vital, none of them on their own will solve the problem of the endless creation of poverty, generation after generation, year after year. And to tackle that, you have to get to the causes. And Pete Alcock rightly said, the most powerful agent of change is national government policy. And it's something that people have been a bit reluctant to talk about, but I think that's a big mistake. Unless we have a government that is committed to public services, that is committed to a social security system that provides security, unless we have a government that is committed to investing in jobs and forcing private capital to invest in the jobs that people need, because if you don't force them, they will only invest when they make enough profit, as my colleague down the back said. Unless we have a government of that sort, we will be endlessly sticking plaster on the wounds. So it's absolutely crucial we get to the core of it, and that means we have to do those two things. We have to try and help with what we can to make things better now, but we have to challenge present government policy, or we'll be here next year and the year after having the same discussion.
Richard, thank you. And of course, thank you. Just to say, one practical thing might be campaigning. It doesn't have to be something that you do on your own. Got 2 more points, and we're just going to wrap it up. So Mel, just tell very quickly, and if I can just encourage you to be brief, both of you, so that we can just finish on time. So.
Yeah, I think just to be particularly positive about some of the initiatives that are taking place, like the Holiday Kitchen, which are hugely important in terms of addressing hunger and starvation in children. We've talked about children only spending 15% of their time in school, but actually it's the only decent meal, nutritious meal that they might get for the whole day. So we need to have a lot more, I think, support of, developing the strategies around universal infant free school meals. There's huge lessons to be learned. There's lots of problems with at the moment, I think Father Oliver alluded to. But also it's about empowering people to be independent. And part of that in terms of providing food is about teaching people how to cook. So we can by all means, provide food and food parcels, but it's about educating people to feed their family healthily when food prices have increased by over 40% in the last 8 years.
Thank you. And finally, very briefly.
We've had some statements from our Labour councillors, Anita Ward and John Clancy, tonight, saying they are really, really, really concerned. Now, I want to refer to something that's been referred to earlier, and if I believe that, I think they should be doing something. We had the reference to the migrant workers, the baby of the migrant workers, and the migrant worker had no food. Now, at present, you get Social Security if you're a migrant worker after 3 months. The Labour Party led the xenophobic charge saying that no, you should not have it after 3 months, but after 2 years. Of course, Cameron's gone further in 4 years. Now, it's possibly to survive by borrowing for 3 months. But if you have no benefits for 2 years or 4 years, you're talking about desperation, you're talking about starvation. Now, if Anita and John Clancy were publicly condemning that policy and saying that's totally cruel and that should not be a policy in a civilized society to stigmatize migrant workers and send them into poverty and starvation, I'd be actually seriously considering what their words are true. But they're not. They're silent on such things. Just lastly, on one campaigning point, Anita is the person who's been announcing these 100 redundancies and the closure in the library. She's depriving working class children from poor families of that access. As I said earlier, there would be a demonstration tomorrow outside the ICC of Birmingham Against the Cuts, people from the library campaigns, disabled people against the cuts, protesting about the support for the cuts by the Labour Party.
All right, thank you very much. One final rebuttal, then. You obviously want to come in, just say something, but very, very briefly, please, okay? Would you like to...
Just to personally ask Stuart, when I personally made that announcement, because I think you're getting me mixed up with somebody else, Stuart.
Okay, ladies and gents, we're not going to devolve into this. Let's just finish off. Ladies and gents, can I, first of all, thank you very much for turning up. It was Chris, I think, who said earlier, it's a rainy old Friday. You could be down the pub. Let's hope you will be joining us. We're going to go for a drink after this at the Woodman. But thank you for turning up here. Thank you for taking part. I'd like you to help me thank our panellists, Pete Alcock, who's gone, Bharat Chauhan, Pauline Geoghegan, who's helped to organise these and set them up in the first place, and Father Oliver Coss. Thank you very much for coming. We're going to do another 2 in these Kerslake debates. We believe very strongly that public debates are really important. The more the merrier, folks. So we'll be letting you know about the next ones. Thank you very much and have a safe journey home.
Thanks to you, Diane.
Great chair. 9 o'clock. 9 o'clock. We're off.